An ordinance amending Section 53 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to add a definition for a rodeo, and adding LAMC Section 53.39.2 to prohibit the use of harmful practices, techniques, and devices at rodeos or rodeo-related events. Whereas, rodeos often use a number of inhumane implements, including electric prods, flank straps, and spurs to encourage aggressive behavior in animals to produce an entertainment product and which inflict injury, pain, and suffering. Whereas, the city has a compelling interest in ensuring the safety and welfare of animals by restricting the use of harmful practices, techniques, and devices at rodeos. And whereas the Los Angeles Municipal Code does not currently define a rodeo or related event. Now, therefore, the people of the city of Los Angeles do ordain as follows. The following definition is added to Section 53 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code in proper alphabetical order to read as follows. Rodeo shall mean an exhibition, performance, or competition that includes any of the following: bareback riding, saddle bronc riding, bull riding, calf roping, steer roping, team roping, tie-down roping, barrel racing, chuck wagon races, or other similar event or activity. Section 2. Section 53.39.2 is added to the Los Angeles Municipal Code to read as follows. Rodeos, prohibited practices, techniques, and devices. It shall be unlawful for any person to conduct, operate, or participate in a rodeo at which any animal is induced or encouraged to perform through the use of any practice or technique, or any chemical, mechanical, electrical, manual device or other similar device or implement that will cause or is likely to cause physical injury, torment, or suffering. Prohibited devices include but are not limited to electric prods or shocking devices, flanks or bucking straps, wire tie-downs, sharpened or fixed spurred rowels, and lariats or lassos. Pursuant to the Penal Code, Section 596.7e, however, in the limited circumstance when necessary to protect a participant or spectator, an electric prod or similar device may be employed, but only for the time the animal enters the performance holding chute until the conclusion of the performance or competition. Exhibition of the animal, which is the time period when the animal's potential for dangerous interaction is most likely. Any person conducting or operating a rodeo shall comply with the requirements of the California Penal Code, Section 596.7b through e, relating to the presence of a licensed veterinarian, availability of conveyance for injured animals, and use of an electric prod or similar device to protect the rodeo participants or spectators. No person shall conduct or operate a rodeo without first obtaining a permit from the department as required in Section 53.50. If any subsection, subdivision, or clause of this portion of the section is held unconstitutional or invalid or unenforceable by any court or tribunal of competent jurisdiction, the remaining subsections, subdivisions, clauses, sentences, phrases, or portions of this section shall remain in full force and effect, and to this end. The provisions of the section are severable. Now, you just heard the language that the Los Angeles City Attorney drafted and submitted to the council for consideration last December. And that is the subject of today's episode. So let's get into the ramifications of this proposed ordinance right after a quick word from our sponsors. Well, I'm proud to welcome the newest sponsor for the Rancher podcast, and that is Elite Ranch Consulting. They are your one-stop shop for protecting your real estate investment. Whether you inherited a piece of land, bought a ranch as your vacation home, or are simply looking to maximize the land you are already working, Elite Ranch Consulting's team of experts can help you make the right decisions to make your land profitable. Visit EliteRanchConsulting.com today to learn more about how they can protect your American dream. Well, howdy, everyone, and welcome back to the Rancher Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Halverson, and today's episode is a bit more serious than a lot of the ones I cover. Obviously, there's a lot of seriousness to the history that we address here, but none of it really rises to the level of things that could potentially happen that would be catastrophic to our industry. So, this is an incredibly important topic, and I think it really deserves its own episode. I'm putting it out on Western Sports Wednesday because, as you heard in the opening scenes of this podcast, rodeo is under attack. And I don't use that term or that phrase lightly. Obviously, as somebody who has grown up in the Western industry, I'm sure that many of you are aware that we've been under attack for quite a long time. And, it's just something that continues to happen more and more as the United States urbanizes. The further people are removed from the daily struggles, the daily experiences of Western, ranching, farming, agricultural, rural upbringings, the less they understand it. And humans as a species, as a whole, really have a hard time understanding things that they do not experience directly. So the more that people move into large cities and the less they're exposed to agriculture, I honestly think the more extreme these threats are going to become, because things that you don't see every day, are inherently foreign to you. And, we're seeing more and more challenges to livestock production, agricultural practices, and rodeo competitions. And I just don't know if we will ever really see a decrease in that. So, that's why it's important for me to talk about this issue today. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I posted an Instagram story about the proposed language that I just read and included some accounts of individuals that not only are active in trying to defeat this, but also just active in countering the narrative about what agriculture is. And, in many publications, the New York Times, other places, the agricultural way of life is being demeaned, which is, to us somewhat comical, because of course that's how the human race has survived for thousands and thousands of years. But that's the popular thing today. But I use that as an example of the kinds of threats that we face are really just a misunderstanding of our way of life. And I think we're under such constant threat that sometimes we feel almost desensitized to it. For decades, groups like PETA, ASPCA, others, they've led campaigns against doing anything with animals, much less exhibiting them in competitions. And, we have had the benefit that their arguments are so absurd that most people don't listen to them. And so we've been able to kind of laugh them off. But we've really just relied on the majority of people in the United States as siding with us over what would, be considered extremist views on the other end. But in recent years, those attacks have increased, as I said, and legislation at every level of government has tried to marginalize our way of life. We have been blamed for climate change. We've been accused of animal cruelty and greed just for the simple crime of owning land and having animals. Now, I will say, with all of these things being considered, our industry is actually in a very good place today, and a much better place than it was even, say, 10 years ago. I mean, the economy of the United States has considerably grown since then, especially in the livestock-friendly states. United States economic growth has almost entirely been in major agricultural states like California, Texas, Florida, and other western states. So the wealth is being redistributed to more western states. And on a lighter note, the carnivore diet is now one of the newest fads, and it's countering the narrative of veganism. You can argue the merits of a carnivore diet all you want, but it's always fun to see somebody who's willing to attack veganism and the inherent flaws of that diet as well. Of course, another data point is that Yellowstone is on TV and everyone wants to be a cowboy. Of course, John Dutton is even providing monologues that refute the attacks on our industry. I've seen his response to Summer about monocrop agriculture and how bad that is for the environment so many places. And, I feel like it's the first time that a lot of us have seen someone who, really understands agriculture and understands it the way we do, having their voice heard in popular culture in a positive way. We're being represented in a positive way across all types of media platforms. And, lastly, I think my biggest point is that the pandemic actually increased attendance at rodeos. For a while, we were the only sport in town in a lot of places. When the NBA closed down and went to a bubble, the NFL wasn't hosting games and the MLB wasn't either. There was nowhere else to go, and people spent their summers at rodeos. New people came in droves to experience this great sport and this American cultural aspect. And you're going to hear me talk about this more later on, but I think that that's an important point to hit on, that rodeo is a great American sport. It is truly American. It came out of the American West. And, this is our culture, right? This is what our ancestors did. This is what our grandparents did. It reflects our agricultural way of life, and it's a way of honoring the West. And, all of these things make this the perfect time, I believe, for our industry to get out of its defensive mindset. Like I said, rodeo is a truly American sport. And when I say American, I include Mexico and Canada, because Hispanic cowboys really pioneered the sport. If you listen to my episode about the history of rodeo with Gail Warner, you'll know that it was Hispanic cowboys and vaqueros that were bored on their cattle drives and other ranching endeavors that decided to entertain themselves by hosting feats of knowledge and skill in the arena that simulated their day-to-day life on the range. And, on top of that, Canada has some of the largest rodeos in the world. So this is not something that's purely Anglo-Saxon or purely white sport. This is something that encompasses all of, the American ideal, the American dream, and all of the identities that make that up, whether they be African American, Native American, Hispanic, or white. So when we talk about rodeo and being an American sport, the melting pot aspect also plays into that. Rodeo also transcends social status, right? Some of the wealthiest zip codes in the world and some of the poorest zip codes in the world host rodeos, whether it's New York City at Madison Square Garden or Las Vegas. You can go out to the middle of nowhere in most states and there will be a county fairgrounds with a rodeo going on every once in a while. So rodeo is just so important to who we are as Americans, and it just is, it's hurtful to me that this type of thing would be under attack simply because people no longer closely identify with it the way they used to. Now, we all know that the West was won on the backs of horses and on the sides of beef that it produced that, truly fed all the pioneers. And rodeo is a celebration of that history. So if we lose that culture, if we lose that, information, that celebration, that identity, what do we have left as Americans is my question. So while this ban may be limited to Los Angeles is a major city. And, it was once home to the NFR, as I talked about in my History of the NFR podcast, and it hosts PBR events annually. In fact, so many celebrities that show up at the PBR event. It's it's funny to think that some of those very people or their friends are the ones who are strongly opposing rodeos being welcomed back into Los Angeles. So, um, when I say this is larger than rodeo, you have to remember that LA is going to host the Olympics in 2028. Do they have to host the dressage, eventing, and jumping, uh, you know, events a few towns over? I mean, when you read through the ordinance that I read through at the beginning of this, you'll understand that this is larger than rodeo, even in its ban. Yes, it defines the term rodeo in it, but what it prohibits is much wider than that. I mean, the use of lariats or lassos, ropes in any way, or any type of mechanical device, those are very vague terms that can be construed a lot of different ways. So, will the events like dressage, eventing, and jumping be allowed in Los Angeles if this passes? Only time will tell. I mean, who knows? In 6 years' times, rodeo might be banned in the entire state. I know that Salinas in Northern California hosts a fantastic rodeo every year, and they've been fighting back against legislation like this for quite a while. But it's a battle that appears to be in somewhat troubling circumstances right now in Los Angeles. So when we think about this, I don't want you to think about it just in terms of rodeo, but that is the spear point that they are utilizing to attack our industry right now. On top of that, there might not be dog shows in LA either. I mean, again, anything that could be construed as forcing an animal under duress of any type to perform, which is what happens in dog shows, that would not be allowed. So, what we're dealing with here is a very difficult to understand law that's being painted as an anti-animal cruelty law, but it's pernicious to believe it's only about animal cruelty. And it brings me to my next point, and that's that we as an industry have to be the leaders in conversations when it comes to animal welfare. I was fortunate to have a class under Dr. Hurd when I was at Texas A&M, all about contemporary topics in equine industry, and one of them, of course, is animal welfare. And he always brought up the great point that if we don't lead on these issues, then legislation will come along that will do it for us. And I think that this is a great example of that. We need to open up the doors, show people what we are doing, why it is humane, the way that we treat, the bulls and whatnot. People don't realize, but these are star athletes, and they're treated very well. They're transported in high-end luxury trailers and whatnot, and their welfare and safety is an economic driver for their owners. So I think it's important that we continue to open the doors, talk to people about what we do, why we love these animals, and continue to be proactive in addressing the concerns, but also be unabashed and unashamed of where we came from and why we celebrate rodeo culture. I think that our industry needs to step up in this regard and also in the legal realm as a whole. I think a big question that comes out of this is, what can you do as an individual? And, the honest truth is that there isn't much that you alone can do, but you can voice your opposition to the potential ordinance. And even larger than that, you need to organize or get part of an organization. In fact, as I record this episode, on the 22nd of February, the Compton Cowboys, which are right down the street from the crypto.com slash what was formerly the Staples Center, actually held a rally at the Staples Center to talk or to voice their opposition to this legislation. And we have strength in numbers. So as I said, our industry really needs to step up its efforts in the legal realm. Lobbyists and lawyers are an insurance policy against bad legislation and restrictions on our way of life. If you remember from one of the early seasons of Yellowstone, the reason that John Dutton sent Jamie off to law school is because he said that, those are the warriors of the 20th and 21st century. Those are the folks that are on the front lines litigating and battling for the soul of our industry. Like I said, lobbyists, lawyers, all these things they're an insurance policy against the bad legislation and the restrictions that are going to impact your life. Just like you pay for insurance hoping you'll never have to use it, this is an investment we all need to make to ensure that the future of our industry is safe. So I'm sure you're asking, where are some places that you can donate? Well, the one leading the charge on the rodeo ban specifically, and also kind of getting its feet under it on a lot of other issues, is the Western Justice Legal Fund, which is actually run by Dave Duquette. And the Western Justice Legal Fund has a unique offering where they have a page that you can actually donate and become a sustaining member of the legal fund. So I will put a link to that in the bio and the information page on this episode. Another outlet which has been around a little bit longer, and I'm sure many of you are aware, is Protect the Harvest. And they've been a major player in protecting agricultural industry as a whole. Refuting narratives, bringing information to the public. And they actually have a great page, which I utilized when doing this episode, that outlines the full extent of the regulations and their impact that would, not only be on rodeo, but also 4-H, FFA, dog training and shows, and countless other events. So I will also put a link to their page so that you can learn more about the proposed rodeo ban and how much further reaching it is than just rodeo. Another outlet, and one that's close to me, is the American Horse Council. They represent the equine industry as a whole, and so that ranges, of course, everywhere from the Jockey Club and racing through Morgan horses and Tennessee trotters and the American Quarter Horse Association, which the American Quarter Horse Association also has a political action committee that you can donate to, and both of those groups have websites that I will be posting as well, where on the American Horse Council website, you can actually sign up for alerts and information about legislation that would be impacting the industry, and how you can contact your member of Congress, your senator, or your local officials and have your voice be heard. So like I said earlier, by the time you hear this podcast, the Compton Cowboys will have already had their rally outside the Crypto.com arena. And, I hope that the turnout was massive. I haven't seen all the clips yet, and I hope that it sent a message to not only the Los Angeles City Council, but also the whole country, that messing with rodeo is a bad idea, because we are passionate about what we do. And not only that, but we understand that we are coming at this sport from a place of compassion, of respect for our heritage, the animals, and the competition as a whole. So lastly, I hope that all of this motivates you listening at home to get involved with the groups I listed above, and also countless other smaller ones across the country that protect your interests as an agricultural producer, as an admirer of the Western way of life. Whatever your role is, there's a place for you in this fight, and I hope you'll join. Now, I've mentioned a lot of the places, and I hope that you will take time to look at the information or summary page on this podcast so that you can learn more about them. And, you might not actually be in agreement with all of these groups on their issues. Many of these do not just focus on rodeos or anything to do with rodeo competition. But, there's an old saying in the world of politics that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so while you might not agree with their stances on all things, again, many of them represent very large swaths of the agricultural sector. On this specific issue, I think it's important that we band together and pull together to show a unified front on issues such as this, or one by one, these things will be taken down. And I don't want us to look back 20 years ago and 20 years into the future and think if we would have stopped them then maybe we would still